You are listening to STR, the Sunday Times Radio. Culture, music, and beyond.
Welcome back to Watch the Icon, the podcast where legendary timepieces aren't just discussed, they are decoded. I'm Sophia Brandwein, publisher of the Sunday Times, and in this fourth episode of our 10-part series, we are shifting gears. From lunar models and deep-sea dives to a completely different kind of revolution. One made of steel, born out of crisis, and drawn with a pen on the eve of a deadline. This is the story of a rebellion, a design that shook the Swiss watch industry to its core and redefined what luxury could look like. Today, we're talking about the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, the watch that turned steel into gold. Let's rewind to the early 1970s. It's not a great time to be a traditional Swiss watchmaker. To understand why the Royal Oak even exists, we need to grasp the seismic shock that was the quartz revolution. The late 1960s and early 70s were a time of panic in the valleys of Swiss watchmaking. For over a century, mechanical watchmakers had ruled the world. Their product was intricate, expensive, slow to make, but it was prestigious, handmade, enduring. And then came quartz. In 1969, Seiko launched the Astron, the world's first commercially available quartz wristwatch. It used a vibrating quartz crystal powered by a battery to keep time, and it was revolutionary. Quartz watches were cheap, easy to mass produce, and most terrifying to the Swiss, far more accurate than their mechanical counterparts. Within just a few years, the floodgates opened. Asian manufacturers produced digital watches by the millions. Prices plummeted. Consumers loved the convenience. By the mid-1970s, hundreds of traditional Swiss brands were either closing their doors or merging just to survive. Jobs were lost, craftsmanship was questioned. The very foundation of Swiss horology was under threat. This wasn't a shift, it was a collapse. And in the middle of it all stood Audemars Piguet, still making mechanical marvels in an age that no longer seemed to want them. Founded in 1875 by Jules-Louis Audemars and Edward Auguste Piguet in Le Bracelet, Switzerland, AP was always the quiet artisan. Unlike Patek Philippe or Vacheron Constantin, it wasn't necessarily a household name, but among collectors and connoisseurs, it held a sacred place. AP specialized in complicated movements, perpetual calendars, minute repeties, split-second chronographs, all made by hand. But that finesse was no longer enough. In 1971, as AP watched the market crumble around it, the board made a bold decision. They wouldn't just survive the quartz crisis, they'd fight it with steel. Not just any steel watch, a luxury steel watch. And not just any luxury steel watch, one that looked like nothing else on the market. So, who do you call when the future is on the line? You call Gerald Genta. To understand how the Royal Oak came to be, you have to understand the man behind the pen, Gerald Genta. A name that now echoes through the watch world like a myth, but in the early 70s, Genta was a one-man design revolution. Born in Geneva in 1931 to Swiss and Italian parents, Genta trained as a jeweler, but quickly discovered his genius lay in watch design. By his early 20s, he was already designing for brands like Universal Genève, where he created the Pole Router, a sleek, modernist piece introduced in the 1950s for SAS Airlines pilots flying over the North Pole. Genta was no ordinary designer. He was prolific, uncompromising, and famously fast. Known for working alone, often sketching entire watches in a single sitting, he once claimed to have designed over 100,000 watches in his lifetime. But quality never took a backseat to quantity. His designs were always thoughtful, architectural, and purpose-driven. And that's where Audemars Piguet comes in. The story of the Royal Oak's creation is watch folklore. And like all good folklore, it begins on the eve of a crisis. It was the night before Bezel World 1971, and Audemars Piguet needed a miracle. Facing the looming collapse of the mechanical watch industry, AP CEO Gerald called Genta with a desperate request. "We need a totally new watch, something the world has never seen before, and we need it tomorrow." Genta didn't flinch. He asked one question. "Do you want it to be in steel?" "Yes," Golay replied, "but it must be a luxury watch." Genta spent the night sketching feverishly, and by morning the Royal Oak was born. He claimed the design was inspired by a deep-sea diver's helmet, specifically the 8 visible screws that secured it to the diver's suit. That imagery became the signature octagonal bezel of the Royal Oak. It was industrial, functional, and paradoxically elegant. The sketch? Done in a matter of hours, but the idea? Timeless. Genta envisioned a watch that wasn't just worn, it was part of you. The case and bracelet were fused into one continuous line, like armor for the wrist. The case was angular, muscular, with pronounced facets. The bracelet had links so finely beveled and finished that they reflected like precious stones. But here is the kicker: it would be made entirely of stainless steel, a material then considered utilitarian, not luxurious. This was radical. In the 1970s, steel watches were tools, not treasures. They were for divers, soldiers, engineers, not CEOs or collectors. But Genta saw the future. He knew that modern luxury was evolving, becoming more casual, more assertive, more bold, and he gave that evolution a face. And what a face it was! The first prototype, when it arrived at Bezel World in 1972, stunned the industry. Reference 5402 ST, 39mm wide, only 7mm thick, with the now iconic petite épicerie dial and ultra-thin automatic movement inside. It didn't look like a dress watch. It didn't look like a sports watch. It looked like the future. Audemars Piguet priced it at 3,650 Swiss francs, more than a gold Patek Philippe at the time. Collectors were confused, critics sneered, dealers balked. But a few got it. Collectors in Italy, always the early adopters, began wearing it with turtlenecks and tailored jackets. Architects and designers embraced it, and slowly word spread. This strange steel watch wasn't just different, it was daring, it was couture engineering. The first production Royal Oaks were hand-finished using techniques typically reserved for gold watches. Every edge of the case and bracelet was beveled, polished and brushed by skilled artisans. Working with steel was far more labor-intensive. It took more than 10 times longer to finish than a traditional watch case from gold. But AP wasn't cutting corners. This was steel treated like jewelry. Gerald Genta, looking back decades later, called the Royal Oak his masterpiece. Though he would go on to design other icons, like the Patek Philippe Nautilus in 1976 and the Bulgari in 1977, it was the Royal Oak that turned him into a legend. When the Royal Oak debuted in 1972, it was unlike anything the watch world had seen. A sports watch, made of steel, that cost more than most gold watches. It was a risk, a provocation, and a turning point. Let's break it down. The original Royal Oak, reference 5402 ST, was named after a series of British naval ships, themselves named after the oak tree that hid King Charles II during the English Civil War. The name evoked nobility, defiance, and protection. Fitting for a watch that would shield Audemars Piguet from irrelevance. Here is what made it revolutionary. The case, 39mm wide and just 7mm thick. The sharp lines, integrated bracelet, and brushed surfaces gave it a futuristic elegance. The bezel, 8-sided, inspired by a diver's helmet, secured with visible white gold screws, a move that defied the conventions of the time, when luxury meant hiding hardware, not celebrating it. The dial, a tapisserie pattern, a guillotine texture, engraved on brass using century-old pantograph machines. It caught the light in mesmerizing ways, giving the otherwise stark design a touch of softness. The bracelet, integrated, tapered, and beautifully finished by hand. Every link was a sculpture in itself, alternating brushed and polished surfaces, incredibly hard to achieve in steel. The movement, caliber 2121, ultra thin yet robust, with a full rotor and date complication. It made the royal oak not just radical in design, but watchmaking too. Initial reactions? Confusion, shock, even mockery. Why would anyone spend 10 times the price of a Rolex Submariner on a steel watch? But Audemars Piguet stood its ground. Only a few hundred units sold in the first year. But then something strange happened. Tastemakers began to notice. Collectors in Italy and France, always ahead of the curve, started wearing the royal oak. Soon, it was spotted on the wrists of aristocrats, architects, and avant-garde designers. The watch became a statement, a subversion of old-school luxury, a declaration that style could be industrial, that steel could be sexy. By the late 70s, the royal oak had become a cult object, and then the legend grew. In the decades that followed, AP doubled down. They introduced smaller sizes, quartz versions, two-tone models, and in 1993 something totally new, the Royal Oak Offshore. Nicknamed the Beast, the Offshore was Genta's angular vision turned up to 11, bigger, louder, and polarizing. At 42mm and with a visible gasket under the bezel, it was a sports watch on steroids. Critics howled. But once again, AP was ahead of the curve. The Offshore became a hit with athletes, musicians, and celebrities, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Jay-Z. Let's talk references, the ones that define the line. 5402 ST, the original Royal Oak, jumbo case, thin profile, tapisserie dial. If you can find one in good condition, it's a grail-level piece. Reference 14802, 20th Anniversary Edition, released in 1992. Only 1,000 pieces made with a display caseback, a first for the Royal Oak. Reference 15202 ST, launched in 2000 and produced for over 2 decades. Considered the spiritual successor to the original jumbo, discontinued in 2022, now a collector's darling. Reference 25860 ST, the first Royal Oak chronograph, introduced in 1998, brought complexity to the iconic design. Reference 26470 ST, a modern Royal Oak offshore chronograph, big, bold, and still hugely popular among athletes and hip-hop icons. And most recently, reference 16202 ST, launched in 2022 to celebrate the 50th anniversary. It retains the 39mm jumbo proportions, but introduces the new caliber 7121, AP's first in-house automatic movement for the Royal Oak. So why does the Royal Oak matter? Because it challenged the entire notion of what a luxury watch could be, and it won. It didn't just survive the quartz crisis, it turned the tide. It inspired dozens of imitators, from the Patek Philippe Nautilus, also by Genta, to countless integrated bracelets watches, trying to catch the same lightning in a case. It blurred the line between elegance and aggression, between jewelry and machine, and it gave Audemars Piguet something most brands never achieve, an identity. You can spot a Royal Oak across the room, and that's by design. In today's market, Royal Oaks are some of the most sought-after watches in the world. Waitlists stretch years, secondary market prices soar, and vintage jumbos Forget about it, they are unicorns. But beyond the hype and headlines, the Royal Oak remains what it has always been, a beautifully made machine, finished by hand, designed with courage, and worn by those who value craft and confidence. That's it for episode 4 of Watch the Icon. The Royal Oak didn't just save a company, it started a revolution, one brushed steel link at a time. Next time, we are heading to the racetrack. From high-speed pursuits to high-stakes auctions, the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona has become the ultimate symbol of precision, performance, and prestige. Born for professional drivers and immortalized by Paul Newman, it's a chronograph that conquered both time and legend. If you're enjoying the ride so far, don't forget to subscribe, rate us, and share Watch the Icon with your fellow horology enthusiasts. Got a Royal Oak on your wrist? Tag us online, we'd love to see it. Until next time, remember, icons aren't born, they are forged.